Martinez, a lot of people wanted him out early in the season. The national fans, they weren't playing well early in the season, maybe because the team wasn't clicking or something was going on in that locker room. And a lot of people thought Martinez wasn't the guy. Did you have any thought when it was going throughout social media and really throughout the analysts throughout the country from ESPN saying that fans there were signs going up in Washington saying we want Martinez out? Did anybody, as far as that you've heard from the organization, or anybody want him to be out, or did anybody think that he was going to get fired if they were going to continue the way they were playing?
I really didn't see signs in the ballpark. I'd have to think about that. I really don't remember seeing people, holding up signs they wanted him out. I mean, the national reporters, that's their job. When they look at the numbers and see a team that's supposed to be a contender for a division title in the postseason has fallen 12 games under 500 after a 4-game sweep in New York against the Mets in the third week of May. They've lost 31 of 50 games. People say, well, they've had all these injuries. Trey Turner got hurt in the first couple of games of the season, badly broken and dislocated finger that eventually needed surgery after the year. When he came back in late May, he was playing with 8 fingers on the bat. And Anthony Rendon said, I don't know, and it was his throwing hand, said, I don't know how he was throwing the ball to first with as much on it as he did because it was painful. That was the big injury for them. And then other injuries, too, that they suffered through, and poor play and lack of hitting and even sloppy defense. But, they made up some ground in June. Gerardo Parra was one of the inspirational leaders after they picked him up off the scrap heap released by the Giants. Hit a grand slam in his first game against the Dodgers in L.A. That was an emotional lift, and just played really well, playing first base, playing 3 outfield positions whenever they needed him to. And then they started to get their people back. June helped because they were playing the Royals and the Tigers and a couple of series with the Marlins. And their pitching was great at that point. Max was in his best stretch of the year, maybe the best I've ever seen him. And Strasburg and Corbin and Anibal Sanchez, who didn't start well last year, was pitching much better. And so they, by the time you got to the middle of July, they'd hit 500. They didn't play well, as I said, against the Braves. They had a losing season series record against the Mets. So they never really made up any ground against Atlanta, but they still were in a pretty good position because the Mets were struggling. The Phillies had injuries and were struggling, particularly as well with their bullpen, like everybody seemingly in the National League East. And then, a couple of days before the trade deadline, my partner Dave Jagler and I were at a hotel after a game, and Mike Rizzo walked in, and all the rumors of the trade deadline, and that the Braves eventually made a bunch of moves. Picking up relievers, Shane Green, and eventually Mark Melancon from the Giants. And, Riz said to us, don't worry, we'll get somebody. He always does. And he made 2 deals and really didn't give up anything because they were at the right on the cusp of the luxury tax threshold, and ownership did not want them to exceed. So, I mean, they had their people looking at guys who could possibly help them, who basically were not making any money.
Right.
And Daniel Hudson was a big acquisition. It's funny, Stan Kasten, was asked about moves that the Dodgers didn't make last year. This was after the season. And he said, you asked me about the moves that, we didn't make. He goes, how about one we did? We didn't re-sign Daniel Hudson. Nobody asked us about that, and he was such a key performer for the Nationals, especially when Doolittle ran out of gas from being overused and went on the injured list in late August. I mean, Hudson got them through and then was a huge factor in the postseason. So, Riz also acquired Hunter Strickland, who wasn't as effective. They eventually ended up releasing him this year in spring training. And Roenis Elias, a lefty, who got hurt in his first game running out when they told him don't swing. He got a last out of an inning in Arizona, and there was a left-handed hitter lead off the next inning. So they said, we want you to start the next inning. Just go up there and take 3 pitches. He swings and fouls one off, breaks his bat as to go to the on-deck circle. And Dave Martinez, obviously bilingual, telling him in Spanish, I said don't swing. He swings and hits a ground ball in the hole and tries to beat it out and pulls a hamstring.
Oh, God.
And tried to come back in September and re-injured it. And he was on the playoff roster for one series and then not in the World Series because he just They didn't trust that he could be effective and didn't want to risk him getting hurt again. So hopefully he'll be a factor this year out of the bullpen if and when we have a game to play.
Talk about your youngster and Juan Soto. He burst on the scene relatively quickly, kind of out of nowhere in 2018. Victor Robles was the big prospect in their system. I think he was number 5 at that time, and Soto wasn't really as highly touted. Are you surprised at how quickly that he played to the dominant level that he played, or is there something that you saw coming in that season that said, all right, this kid could be special?
Well, before he came to the big leagues, we didn't see him. He wasn't in Major League Spring Training. He wasn't even a call-up for the minor league side to play in a game that we saw in 2018. And again, they had all those injuries at the beginning of the year. Adam Eaton still not recovered. Howie Kendrick was one of the last injuries, blowing out his Achilles. And so they were running out of outfielders. And Soto had never played left field, and he was only in Double-A about 10 days. He'd been hurt much of the year before. And so the start of that year, he was in Low-A. He wasn't even in High-A. And he started off so well, they moved him up after a couple of weeks, and then quickly to Double-A. He'd already climbed from Low-A to High-A to Double-A. And when Mike Rizzo called his farm people and said, "Get Soto coming this way," they said, "What? Are you kidding me?" No, we think he can handle it from what they saw watching him in minor league camp in the spring. And boy, were they right. He had a home run in his first game over the bullpen at left center field at Nationals Park, and he never stopped. It was an incredible run. And, even Bryce Harper said, if they don't re-sign me, they feel that, they have a guy that can replace me in Soto.
We are talking to Nationals play-by-play announcer Charlie Slows. And speaking of Bryce Harper, and he was the face of the Nationals for many, many years. He was looked upon as the next Mickey Mantle coming from high school. He was 13 years old. He was in Sports Illustrated, and he was drafted the same year. He was the number 1 pick the same year as Mike Trout, and they've been compared to each other since they came into the league. When Bryce Harper became a free agent about a year and a half ago, did you think that the Nationals had any chance of bringing him back, or did you think that he was on his way out?
Well, it was kind of the elephant in the room the whole final season for him, because you felt like, he got to that point and hadn't signed yet, that they would have to blow him out of the water to make him pass up free agency. Now, he was open to it, and obviously they made him an offer at the end of the season, but he wanted to test the waters, and, I guess there was some amount of deferred money involved, as there is for a lot of contracts, and, to each his own. Some players do deferred money. Steven Strasburg did a bunch last year. Max Scherzer has deferred money. Guess what? They're all Scott Boras clients. Anthony Rendon would not do deferred money, and he's with the Angels. So, just to sidetrack, this is something I've been thinking about in the last couple of days with the supposed 50-50 split potential presentation by the owners, which after was leaked to Bob Nightingale has never been officially presented to the players. So they already know that they view that as a salary cap. Now, a lot of players want their money, and they don't want deferred money in their contracts. And I know players got some amount of money in the $170 million that was paid out in April and May. And the players were paid not based on their contract, but based on their time in baseball, their service time. But if the owners were to come back and say, okay, well, we won't do the 50-50 revenue share because you guys won't agree to that, what if we do deferred money? We'll pay you what we agreed to in March, even though there's nobody in the stands, but we'll pay it to you over 2 years. Would everybody be happy with that, just to have baseball?
Probably
You'd
not.
still get your money if it was deferred money with maybe some interest thrown on top of it?
No, I don't think they'd be happy about that. As you heard, what Blake Snell has said on Twitch.
Well, Snell said he didn't want the revenue sharing.
Right.
But if you got the money, if you're going to get your 80 over, if it's 80 games, you're going to get your 80 over 162. Only we need to spread it out because we're not going to have fans in the stands.
Charlie, broadcasting for the Nationals, which are the newest team, they're the newest expansion franchise. What was it like broadcasting for a team that, again, the fans haven't seen baseball since 1972 before that? Kind of a new city for them. What was it like broadcasting in that kind of environment?
Well, the Nationals were the Expos, so the Expos were the expansion team in 1969 that opened up against the Mets at Shea Stadium, by the way. But they were the team that moved to Washington, and obviously I was there for the start of the Nationals in 2005. Coming from the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, as they were known, through 2004 in my time, an expansion team was there for their first game. Dave Martinez got the first hit in Rays history. In the second inning, I was calling that. It was a ground ball up the first base line. In the box score was a vicious line drive. On our radio broadcast, the ball hit the first base bag and went past the Tigers' first baseman, who, by the way, was Tony Clark, and into right field for a hit. So a little bit of history there. But that's one of the highlights of my career. Not so much the first game for the Nationals in Philadelphia. They opened with a 9-game road trip, but the long-awaited first game back in Washington, April 14th, 2005. First game, Major League game, regular season game in Washington since the Senators left after the 71 season. And just to see the faces of fans coming into the stands, the reaction of the players. If you were to talk to players, many of the Latin players like Livan Hernandez and Vinny Castilla, guys who played on other teams, Castilla had a great career. When you bring up that day or that first season with the Nationals, they're ear-to-ear grins, and they talk about it as if they won a pennant because they felt like it was that important to them to bring baseball back to the nation's capital. And especially, for not only Castilla came from another team, but many of the guys were the Vagabond Expos who spent a couple of years playing almost half their home games in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and having, 30-day road trips with games in San Juan away from Montreal. So they were a traveling vagabond show for a couple of years. So they were ecstatic to play in front of big crowds in D.C. in 2005.
Charlie, I'm sure you heard a lot about this, especially being announcer, and you were there for the World Series. Did you hear anything going on in the Houston Astros dugout, like everybody was saying? And if you did, what did you hear?
You couldn't hear anything from the dugout. I mean, as far as back to 2017, I can tell you, I know people who worked for the Astros broadcasters, who did not know what they were doing with the banging of the trash cans because you couldn't hear it upstairs. Now, obviously, on some of those videos that you saw or wherever those mics were, you could hear it, but you're actually being told to listen for it. If you weren't listening for it, maybe you don't even know what that is or where it's coming from. And I know there are other people who found out after that 2017 World Series what was going on, but of course never spoke about it. Amazing thing in all this to me is like the Red Sox, Alex Cora resigns. Their video guy gets suspended. All of the Astros video people, some of whom have become assistant general managers, are still employed from people who were there in 2017, which is amazing to me. I don't believe anything when they say the GM and the manager, the GM didn't know what was going on. The owner did not know what was going on. Did no one see the bills for the new TVs that went in after A.J. Hinch supposedly smashed them with a bat to try and get them to stop doing what they're doing? Do I buy into that he wasn't the manager that he was in 2019 and was in 2017, that he couldn't have stopped it? So in other words, Carlos Beltran and Alex Cora were too strong for him to be able to put them down and say, this is not right, we can't do this. So a hitting coach saying he didn't know that this was going on, something that affected his hitters. So it's hard to believe anything. And, I love Dusty Baker as a person. I thought poor Dusty Baker had to sit at that press conference at the beginning of spring training to be the guy that lend some class when he had nothing to do with any of that.
Right.
To me, okay, you hired Dusty Baker to manage your team. He should not have had to sit at that press conference with the owner and the GM or not the GM wasn't there anymore, but the players who did a poor job of speaking at the press conference. Better when they spoke in the clubhouse later, but that was a disaster. Find out one thing, a guy who owns a baseball team like that, is probably very successful in his career and in life, financially and in many ways, but not in front of a microphone on national TV.